This is Gemara Yevamos, Daf Mem Gimel. All the learning for today has been generously sponsored by a close friend of the Daf. L'zechanishmas, his father, Rav Eliezer Moshe ben Shema, whose yahrzeit was on the second day of Pesach. And the learning of the entire Chabura should bring Rav Eliezer Moshe ben Shema to higher place in Gain and Shamayla, and to his entire attended family, Yeshuas and Brachos. As well as Chashinuch Yisrael B'chaim and Devar Tamziv ben Parazvel, Chashomim Levizavo, V'Metel Shem Chayim, Shalom Yudas Bas Sima Malka, as well as Chosvu Hashem Shal Yis and Veda Shmo ben Tilo Tanzim Echlas and Nachama Besviva, Sarah Blum Bas Mindel Chayim Moshe Yeshua ben Malka, B'Shav Thego Shirchana. We're holding in the bottom of Amid Bees. We are 5 lines from the wide lines. First of all, an apology. The last shiurim are a bit late due to Yontif. I apologize. Mirza Hashem. All the shiurim going forward should be back on schedule. And that goes for the Mishnah Berurah shiurim for those who are zeicha to learn as well. So we pick it up, 5 lines from the wide line. Says the Gemara, Mistamich of Azel, Rav Avua Kasvei de Rav Nachum Shamai. Rav Avua was leaning on the shoulder of whom? Of his servant Rav Nachum as he was going. Minakid v'azel halchas aminei. And as he was going, Rav Nachum was collecting. Rav Nachum, the servant, being Meshamish, his Rebbe Rav Avua, was collecting pearls of wisdom, was collecting halachas, listening to what his Rebbe Rav Avua would say, all the different halachas. And Bala Minei, so when he asked of his Rebbe Rav Avua, Machlokes v'acher kach stam mai, and of course this is a direct segue off of yesterday in which we were proving whether Rav Yochanan indeed held like Rav Yossi or not. And we proved it from the fact that even though there was a stam Mishnah, but then it was a machlekes subsequently. And now we're going to see some klalim. And exactly, just to remind ourselves what's going on over here, this means either within one mesechta, or it means in back-to-back mesechta, is a stam, and then a machlekes, and a stam. So he asked Rav Avua, machlekes v'acher kach stam hai. And Amar Lei, his Rebbe responded, halacha kistam. So if it's first a fight, the machlokes, and later in Shas we find a stam, that is a psak halacha. Stam b'acher kach machlokes, 2 lines at the bottom. Let's say in the reverse, if it just says it's stam, and then later there's a machlokes mai, Amar le ein halacha kistam, then the halacha does not follow this stam. And now he continues with more rules. Stama demasnisa nu machlokes bibraisa. What do we do now? Mishnah versus Braisa. My Amarlech halacha kistam, we go with the stam, which is a Mishnah, which is very understandable. Machlokes b'masnisan ustama debraisa. Now it's getting a little tricky because you know that at some level Mishnayos are better, but here you have a stam braisa. My, what's the halacha? Amarlech. So as Rabbi Rav Avua responded, as we turn over to today's Daf Mem Gimel and Aleph. And he responded and he retorted, V'chi Rebbe lo shina. Did Rebbe not teach the ruling? Rav Chia minayimai. Rav Chia authored the Braisos. Rebbe was the Mishnayos. So Rav Chia in a Braisa comes along and gives a stam Braisa. But Rebbe in the Mishnayos didn't learn that. So it responds to Rav Avua, the severity of a stam Braisa is not so strong because Rebbe didn't put it in the Mishnayos. And therefore, the anonymous Braisa does not help us. Amar lei, so now after his Rebbe taught him all these halachas, Rav Nachum responds and he says, V'atanan, we have the following Mishnah. Masreik shal pishtan, we have a comb used for flax. We'll see in a moment a different type of comb. This is a comb used for flax, a fine foam, it's a wooden comb with metal teeth, that shenil loshina, that the teeth fell off of the comb. V'nishtayru ba ishtayim, and there's 2 teeth of the comb left. Tameos, it's tummy. What does it mean? It's tummy. It means it's mekabel tuma. It means it still has the status of a keli. We know all vessels, all utensils are susceptible to accept the ritual impurity to be mekabel tuma. So if there's 2 teeth left, it still could do a bit of combing. Therefore, it is tummy. V'achas, but if only 1 tooth is left, then the halacha is tahira. It's considered a broken vessel, and it's going to be tar. V'kulan. But all of them, and if any of the teeth were detached, each tooth, doesn't mean teeth of the comb by itself, it's still tamei, because the individual teeth could be used for things. Perhaps it's a toothpick, perhaps it could be used as a cleaning utensil, as we'll see. So if it's detached, that individual tooth would be tamei because it has a usage. Shel tzemer. Now what's if it's a masrik shel zemer. It's a comb used for raw wool. Shenid loshina, that the tooth came off. Achas mi beintayim, one from between each other. It's missing every other tooth of the comb. Tar, it doesn't do. In order to comb wool, you need to have all the teeth there. It's going to be tar. Nishtayir boy gimel. If 3 teeth, a wool comb is different. It needs to have 3 teeth to comb properly. B'makam echad in one area. Tameh, then it has the status of a utensil. But if one of those 3 teeth was on the outer edge, and therefore it's not going to be able to use to comb the wool properly, tar, then it's tar. Nilla beis vasa in the milkat. If 2 teeth were taken off, and he made tweezers out of those 2 teeth, Tameos, it's tameh, because again, it has a usage onto itself. Achas, if 1 tooth was removed, vitkina lener, and it's now used to clean a nair, a candle, oil lemitoch, or it's used to stretch a cloth out on top of it, Tameos still has a usage. That's the end of the brisa. What does it have to do with what we just said? V'kaim alon, and asks Rav Nachum to his Rabbi Rav Avua. We learned de'ein halacha koisa mishnah. The halacha does not follow this mishnah. Even though this is a stam mishnah, which has a machlokes in a different brisa, and we do not paskin like the stam mishnah. And you, Rabbi, you Rav Nachum, you taught me, you Rav Avu, you taught me, Rav Nachum, says Rav Nachum, that we would paskin like the stam mishnah. So Amar Le, Rav Avu responds, Bar mina dahi, that the mishnah is different. Don't ask from that mishnah. Why? To Rav Yochanan Reish Lakish, Darmi Tavayu Zuin, mishnah, both Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they both said, this is not a Mishnah, it's not an accurate text. It was obviously in transmission. They transmitted the Mishnayos, the Brises orally. There was an issue in it. So don't ask me from that one. My time says the Gemara, what was the issue with this Mishnah? Amar Ravuna bar Manoyach, Mishmeid Ravidi Berid Ravik Mishom, Tekasha Reish L'Seifa, because the Mishnah itself is inherently contradictory. The first to the latter part of the Mishnah, it says a woolen comb if one of each of the other teeth were taken out, it's going to be tar, it's a broken vessel. But if 2 teeth are left over, the obvious implication it's going to be tameh. It still functions as a comb. Father Tani, then the end of the Mishnah learned, Nishtayir by Gimel Tameh. If 3 are left, it's Tameh. The obvious implication, Gimel in Shtayim Lai. So from the fact that we see that the Mishnah itself contradicts itself, says the Gemara of Yochanan Reish Lakish held that you cannot learn from this Mishnah. Ask the Gemara, my koshya, and what is the question? Is everything okay? Oh my koshya, what is the question? Dilma habigavaisa, habibraisa. Ask the Gemara, what's the question? Maybe one is bigavaisa, maybe it's on different parts of the comb. And that is how we would answer up the stira, that if it's the inner teeth, 2 would be called functioning. If it's including an outer tooth, as we said, those aren't as functionable with the keli, then it's going to require 3. Says the Gemara, you're right. Rather, we learn from over here, a different part of the Mishnah shows that the Mishnah is not accurate. If any one of the teeth are removed by itself, it is tamei. And even though the tooth itself is not prepared, you didn't fashion it to be done anything with, but yet, what do the Seifa say? Achas you took off the tooth and you fashioned it for a candle. You fashioned it to be used to stretch over a cloth. So we see from the sefer it has to be doing something with that candle. Then Tameyo, the obvious implication is it's kinin lo tkin aloi. So that's how we show that the Mishnah is a contradictory. Amar Abaya says, Abaya, my koshya. The first part is dealing that you took off the teeth together with the handle. Therefore, it can be used in that fashion. And the latter part of the Mishnah is you took off the teeth, therefore you have to fashion it to use it. Says the Gemara, so Amar Rabba, another kasha. Well, my kasha says Rabba, one is dealing with narrow teeth, and therefore it's hard to use. One is dealing with fatter teeth of the comb, which could be used on itself. Says the Gemara, you're right. So how do I know that this Mishnah is indeed contradictory? Ella Misham, you know the reason is the Misaimu Ba Dav Kane. The reason is because those were Meduyak, there were Talmidei Chachamim that knew perfection in the text of the Brises and the Mishnayos, and they said Zu Divri Rav Shimon, that this is Rav Shimon, and therefore, what was the old kasha? That's a Stam Mishnah, and a ladder Machlekes in a Brisa, and we don't basket like the Stam Mishnah. Says the Gemara, it's not a Stam Mishnah, it's a Mishnah, the Shita of Rav Shimon. Says the Gemara, okay, let's go back to the discussion that we began yesterday, the discussion regarding the waiting the 3 months, the time of Havchana, the 3-month waiting period between marrying one wife to a second wife. We started with regard to Yibum, and we segued by Girushin and death as well. There's the Gemara about 20 lines down. The first one line is Zu Divrei Rav Shimon. Shalach Rav Chiya bar Avin Ma'arsin. Asks Rav Chiya bar Avin, Ma'arsin Taich Shalaloish. If they did Erusin within 3 months, and again, this should ostensibly not be any issue. So the issue is that a child could be born. From Erusin, there's no tashmish, there should be no child. He said you're allowed to do Erusin, and that is what the Chacham himself did. First of all, that you're allowed to do Erusin, and din number 2 is that how long do you have to wait? The first month majority, the last month majority, and a complete middle month. So it's not 3 90-day months, but it's 2 majority of the months and a full middle month. And Ameimar Shara Liares B'Yom Tishim, and Ameimar says on the 90th day, even though the full 3 months did not elapse, you're allowed to get married right away. Amrli Rav Ashla, Ameimar, you just told me you could get married within the 90 days. V'Rav Ushmo Damri Tvar Ziklan the Gimel Chadashim Chutz Miyom Shemeis By V'Chutz Miyom Shenisar. But we see it has to be a complete 90 days. Answers the Gemara. That was regard to nursing. You have to wait 24 months. And that's why it's a different din. Don't ask on me. Ask the Gemara about says the Gemara, but we have a story. And in this story, he made a Sudas Erisin. And yet you made him lose his Suda. Says the Gemara, no, it wasn't Erusin, it was a different story. That was Nisuin. What's the halacha? Concludes the Gemara. You have to wait both the 24 months, excluding those days, and the 3 months, excluding those days. And now we get to the next part of the Mishnah, which the Mishnah said, Chutz min almana, the Shita of Rav Yesi came along and said that everyone can come and do Erusin right away. That was Shitas Rav Yesi, which we dealt with at the beginning of today's year. That was whether Rav Yochanan Paskins like Rav Yesi, the end of yesterday's year. The Shita Rav Yesi that you're allowed to do Erusin because Erusin is not going to create a child, obviously. And then the Mishnah said, Chutz min almana, so almana can't get married right away. Why not? Said the Mishnah because of Avelus. There's a din of Avelus, and you can't get married for 30 days within the Avelus of the first husband. Amar Rav Chisda Kal V'Chaimer. I'll teach you a Kal V'Chaimer. Asks Rav Chisda on Rav Yosi. During the week of Tisha B'Av, you're not allowed to do laundry, and yet you're allowed to do Erusin. In this case, the Almana within 30 days, the Shleishim, Mokum Shemoter L'Chav is allowed to do laundry. You know, Din Shemoter L'Aris, you should be able to do Erusin. So ask Rav Chisda and Rav Yosi. You are saying you're not allowed to do Erusin. Why not? Says the Gemara, Mahi, what is this din that you're referring to? The Tanakh we learned in the Mishnah. The week of Tisha B'Av, the Gemara is that we learned together. You're not allowed to give haircuts. You're not allowed to do laundry. On Thursday, it's allowed for Shabbos. Vitania, we learned in a Raisa. Before this man, the people stopped, diminished their business. From building, from creating, from planting, melitin, from engaging in business, ma'arsin, and from doing erusin, avoloi kainsin. You're allowed to do erusin, you're not allowed to do kainsin, you're not allowed to do chapa. Ve'nois in sudas erusin, and you do not make the sudas erusin. So says the Gemara, what do we see? We see that even though you don't do laundry the week of Tisha B'Av, still you're allowed to do erusin. Answers the Gemara, Kitanya Kaidim de kaidim. That's not referring to the week of Tisha B'Av. That's referring to the time period beforehand. But Amar Rava continues Rava 4 lines in the bottom to ask the kaidim nami kal v'chaymer. That's also kal v'chaymer. When you're not allowed to do business, you're allowed to do erisin. Malkiv shemoter lisa v'lisin and Alvel during Shleishim's allowed to do business. Hey no danger motel yaris. Answers the Gemara, change the text of the Mishnah. Don't say that the Mishnah reads that Rav Yosi says that all women are allowed to do erisin. Elaima, you know what Shita Rav Yosi is? Kol hanashim yinasu. They're allowed to do nisuin. And therefore, Rav Yosi is not talking about erisin at all. And therefore, when Rav Yosi says, but an almana cannot do it, almana cannot do what? He's referring to nisuin and not erisin. As we turn over to Mem Gimel Beis, says the Gemara, 1 second. Nisuin! But last later, Rav Yosi lahavchid. Rav Yosi argues on the past few days. He holds there's no din of avchana. You don't have to wait 3 months. He holds you're allowed to do nisuin. Nisuin is consummation of the marriage. That's chuppah, that's tashmish. How could that be? Answers the Gemara, yeah, Leslie. Rav Yosi argues on the whole thing. He agrees, holds of this concept. You know, Rav Yosi is teaching us, Rav Yosi is teaching us, all women that were divorced from erisin, they're allowed to do nisuin. So when he said kol hanashim, it didn't refer to everyone, only referred to the grusha from erisin. He asked the Gemara 4 lines down, Mem Gimel Beis, I know Rav Yehuda. What's the machlaikas? He can now nisua li ares. The nafkamina is going to be a nisua. It is one allowed when there was nisuin to go into erisin. Rav Yehuda saw nisua muteres li ares. Rav Yehuda saw nisua asura li ares. That if there was originally a nisuin, then Rav Yosi holds you cannot do erisin right now. Savar Rav Yosi nisua asura li ares. Really? Does Rav Yosi really hold that? You're changing the whole world over here, and you're telling me Rav Yosi holds that once there's nisuin, you can't do erisin. V'atanya, we learned explicitly in a brayz. Rav Yosi Omer kol hanoshim yisarsu chutz min almanim and ne'evel v'kam evel shalosh leishim yamin v'kulam lo yinasu ad shilem gimel chadash and I'll do nisuin until 3 months. So says the Gemara, it's explicit in the brayza. Well, how can you answer the brayza? Says the Gemara, what's your question? Hi, my kushya. You're the Ktani Rav Yosi Omer kol hanoshim yisarsu mi alima mimasnis anukim the barusas grushas yinasu hochinami kol rusi garshu grushas yinasu. Says the Gemara, just like we changed the text of our Mishnah, we're going to change the text of this braysa. We changed the Mishnah when it said kol hanashim. What was the kol hanashim? It was referring to all women that are gerusha, that were divorced from erisin. So we'll change the braysa as well. Says the Gemara, Ela mi seifa. Okay, so now let's go and ask from the seifa. The Ketani, v'kula lo yinasu ad shilem gimel chadashim. Says Rav Yosi, they're not allowed to get married until they wait 3 months. In suvehu delay, what's the obvious implication that they're not allowed to do ninsuve? They can't do nisuin. Ha'yisrusei shabar dami, they're allowed to do erisin. So what do we see then in this braysa? That you're allowed to do erisin right after nisuin. So Amar Rava comes along Rava and he explains, Teretzvei Mahachi explain as follows. Rav Yosi Omer kol arusais gerushais yinasu. All arusais that were divorced, meaning if they were divorced from erisin, they never got to manage to do chuppah yinasu. They're allowed to do nisun. Chutz min almana mimnei evil, except from an almana, because of aveilos, v'kama evil shloshim yamim, unesuos lo yisarsu explicitly achi lehen shlosh chadashim, and a nesua cannot even do erisin until they wait the requisite 3 months. So now, what do we see according to the shita of Rav that the end of the brayso is teaching us that it's not telling you that after every nesua you're allowed to do erisin right away. Rather, exactly the opposite. Nesuais lo yisarsu, they cannot do erisin until they wait 3 months. Ask the Gemara, we're nothing to it. V'almana min eirisin miyas le'evil? 1 second. You just changed everything. And you said the case of Avelos, the case of death, the case of Almana, was an Almana that they only married the first stage of Erisin. Says the Gemara, is there really Avelos from an Almana, from an Erisin, and they only did Erisin? If someone dies after only getting a chance to do Erisin, you're not an Einin, you don't become Tameh to them. She does not Einin, she doesn't come Tameh. Meisa, if she dies in a Yarsha, Meisu, Kaivik Subasa. So says the Gemara, there's no Dini Avelus. So your whole answer of it doesn't start to tell me that the death had happened after Irisin, but there's no Avelus. Ella explains the Gemara, you know what the halacha is, whether going back to the week of Tisha B'Av, you're allowed to do Erisin, Tanoi, it's Machlokes, Tanoim, the Tanya, Mirish Chodesh, Vadat Hainis, Hamimatin me'askim Elisa Melita Melivnos Anatoya Umele Aris Umelisa Shabish Echal Tisha B'Av Zeich Asla Saber Lechabis V'Asala Aris. So says the Gemara, this brayso is not like the original brayso that we quoted. In this brayso, what do we see? That you're not allowed to do Erisin during the Shvua Shachal Boy, and therefore that's what Rabbi Yosi. How did this whole party begin? Is we had a kasha and Rabbi Yosi, a kal v'chaymer during the week of Tisha B'Av, when you're not allowed to do laundry, you're allowed to get married. Here during Avelo Shleishim, when you're allowed to do laundry, certainly you should be allowed to get married. Says the Gemara, according to this brayso, you're not allowed to get married, and that's what Rabbi Yosi is going to go with. And some say finishing that brayso kol hachodesh asar. The entire month, haircutting and laundry is asur, and therefore that's how we answer up the kasha. Maskiv la Ravashi, we're towards the bottom 8 lines of the Mishnah. Mimai de la aris mamish. Interesting kasha. How do you know when the brayso said they did erisin? It meant really erisin. Sudas erisin udasar. Maybe what's forbidden? It's forbidden to make a party. Halare shaberdami, but to do the actual erisin, that's okay. Says Mar, wait, if that's true, Melisa v'lenisain, Melisa, it said from doing nisuin, linase nami lemevet sudas nisuin udaser. So it has to be parallel to Mishnah. If you're telling me that when it said erisin, what did that mean? To do the sudas erisin, but the actual erisin is allowed. So then when it says to do nisuin, what did it mean? The suda of nisuin, but the actual nisuin is allowed. Halisa Shaber Dami Halchiyashta. Could that be? Says Imar Bisham Nisuin B'lai Suda Ika Simcha. Elerisin B'lai Suda Mika Simcha. So that would make no sense. So Elam Ravashi Shani Avelos are totally new terets. Shani Avelos Chadasha Me'avelos Yeshana. Shani Avelos Derab Me'avelos Tiyachid. What was the original kasha we were asking on our case? The Mishnah of Rav Yosi, who says an almana has shleishim, and the almana of shleishim cannot do ask the Gemara from Tisha B'Av. Concludes the Gemara, Shani Avilas Chadasha, Avilas Yeshana. As much as we might try to feel the Churban at the end of the day, it's Avilas Yeshana. So therefore, it's going to be different. Shani Avilas Derabim, Gans Klal Yisrael's morning from this Avilas, and therefore that's the reason why you can't ask questions one to the next. We'll pick it up in the next Mishnah.